I gripped my leather portfolio as I walked through Horizon Digital Solutions doors. The guard handed me a visitor badge with New Hire Orientation, printed in bold. In the elevator, I barely recognized the woman in the reflection. Emily Parker 2.0, a sharp barb and a charcoal suit, no trace of the devastation from 6 months ago. Stepping off the elevator, I passed employees whispering about the all-hands meeting. Grace Tomkins, HR director, greeted me with a subtle wink. As we passed the breakroom, I saw Nathan, oblivious to the storm about to hit. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. 6 months ago, everything I knew and trusted in my life came crashing down. It started at our anniversary party, a celebration of 15 years of marriage, one that I had painstakingly organized. The garden was lit with string lights woven through the maple trees, and a carefully curated playlist played our song-filled love story in the background. Yet, as I looked around at our guests, I noticed something unusual about Nathan. He seemed distant, always checking his phone, sneaking off for calls, disappearing into corners when he thought no one was watching. I had made excuses for him before, and I did so again, dismissing his strange behavior. But nothing could prepare me for the truth I was about to uncover, something that would shatter the image of our perfect life. It was after the party, once the last guests had trickled away and the house fell silent, that I found the first sign. I was cleaning up, still in my silk dress, when I received an alert from our joint credit card account. A large, unrecognizable charge for $12,000 from Cartier flashed across my phone screen, marked as made that very afternoon. Nathan had told me he was preparing for an important presentation, but the charge didn't align with what I knew about his day. I assumed it was fraud at first, but then Nathan appeared at the doorway, loosening his tie. "Someone's using our card," I said, showing him the screen. "A $12,000 charge from Cartier." His response was quick, his face momentarily flickering with something like guilt before he managed to mask it with a strained smile. "It's a surprise for our anniversary," he said smoothly. "You weren't supposed to see it." It would have been easy to believe him, but then a text came in, one that would change everything. It was from Olivia, a close friend, the same woman who had been at our party earlier. She had sent me a photo of her hand adorned with a Cartier bracelet, clearly a gift from Nathan. The message read, "Thank you for the perfect anniversary gift. Can't wait until it's not a secret anymore." The same woman who had just hours ago shared in our celebration was now wearing the bracelet Nathan had supposedly bought for me. My heart sank as the truth became undeniable. I showed Nathan the message, and he scrambled for an explanation, but there was no hiding it. The betrayal was already out in the open. How long had it been going on? 2 years, he confessed after some back and forth, his words coated with the same indifference he had shown for our entire marriage. 2 years. My world, my home, my love, my family, had been a lie. Nathan had been living a double life. Not only had he been involved with Olivia, but he had also been secretly diverting money into luxury purchases, crypto investments, and even a second condo, all paid for using my credit. I was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered financial future. But it wasn't just the personal betrayal that stung. It was the professional deception. Nathan had misled clients and manipulated the company's resources for his own personal gain. He had undermined everything I had built, both in our marriage and in my career. He had always been dismissive of my cautious nature, my preference for detailed analysis, my obsession with security and protection. He had mocked me for not being cutthroat enough for the fast-paced tech world. It wasn't until later that I realized how his shortcuts had become more than just reckless decisions. They were vulnerabilities. As the storm inside my personal life raged, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Nathan's betrayal destroy me. Instead, I would use it to rebuild everything. My life, my career, and most importantly, the security systems that Nathan had actively compromised. I reached out to old colleagues, including Maya, a forensic expert from graduate school, and Dr. Diane Foster, a renowned security specialist. Together, We pieced together Nathan's financial manipulations and drew parallels to his professional conduct at Horizon Digital Solutions. With each discovery, I began to see the larger picture. His failure to maintain basic security measures was more than negligence. It was a pattern of exploitation. I reached out to Richard Harmon, the chairman of Horizon, and presented my findings. Richard was a pragmatic man. When I explained that I had personal experience with Nathan's unethical behavior, he didn't dismiss me. Instead, he saw the unique perspective I brought to the table. He saw that I could help clean up the mess Nathan had left behind. By the time I was offered the position of Chief Security Officer at Horizon, I knew it wasn't just a job. It was a way to transform the entire company. Nathan had built his career on shortcuts, but I would use the lessons I had learned from betrayal to create a culture of accountability, transparency, and real protection. The morning I entered Horizon for the first time as the new CSO was surreal. I carried the weight of both personal and professional transformation with me. I wasn't just walking into a new role. I was stepping into a battle to rebuild everything Nathan had broken. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Nathan, though shaken, still had allies at Horizon, and many of the employees feared the consequences of speaking out. But I was determined. In just a few hours, Nathan would learn that his empire of lies was about to collapse. I had come not just to clean up the mess, but to create a new standard, one built on the integrity Nathan had mocked. As I sat in my first board meeting, presenting the security vulnerabilities I had uncovered, I could feel Nathan's gaze on me. The tension between us was palpable. He couldn't comprehend how quickly the tides had turned, but I was focused. The board members listened intently as I outlined the full extent of Horizon's security lapses, laying bare the systems that Nathan had knowingly compromised for the sake of profit. The moment arrived when I made my statement clear. Horizon's security overhaul was not optional. It was necessary for the company's survival, and Nathan would have to answer for his negligence. The board supported me unanimously, and Nathan's reaction was exactly what I expected, outraged and defensive. But that didn't matter. The shift had already begun. That afternoon, I replaced my temporary badge with the one that said, Chief Security Officer. The weight of it felt satisfying in my pocket, a tangible symbol of the transformation that was underway. Horizon was about to change, and it would no longer be a company where shortcuts were tolerated. As I settled into my new role at Horizon, I couldn't help but feel a sense of strange satisfaction. It was no longer just about fixing the company's security systems or the mess Nathan had created. It was about proving to myself that I was stronger than the betrayal. What I had once believed was a personal failure had now become the foundation of a professional revolution. Over the next few days, I worked tirelessly to overhaul Horizon's security infrastructure, leading a team that was committed to transparency and accountability. The scope of the task was vast. 76% of Horizon's enterprise clients had inadequate protection, many of their systems vulnerable to attacks and breaches that had been ignored or deliberately overlooked by Nathan's department. But this wasn't just about tightening up security systems. It was about changing the entire culture of the company. I had no illusions that it would be easy. Nathan's influence was still strong within certain circles of Horizon. People were afraid of challenging him, of losing their jobs. The culture of intimidation he had cultivated over the years wasn't going to disappear overnight. But I knew that if I wanted to rebuild this company, it had to be done from the inside out. This wasn't going to be a cosmetic change. It was going to be a systemic transformation. The first hurdle came sooner than I expected. I was preparing for my first all-hands meeting when Grace, a trusted colleague, approached me. Nathan called an impromptu meeting with the client relations team this morning, she said, her voice laced with concern. He's been presenting alternative security plans, ones that don't disrupt the client's timelines as much. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. It was exactly what I'd anticipated. Nathan was never one to accept defeat gracefully, and now he was trying to undermine the very security overhaul I had spent days crafting. Where are they meeting? I asked. Grace led me to the conference room where Nathan was presenting his plan, showing slides that cherry-picked elements of my proposals while discarding the essential structural changes needed for real protection. The room went silent as I entered. Nathan looked up, a smirk on his face, as if he thought he had a solution that would outsmart me. "This is an interesting proposal, Director Parker," I said calmly, standing next to the screen where his watered-down plan was displayed. "But I'm curious why it wasn't submitted through the proper channels for security protocol review." His expression hardened, but he quickly recovered, maintaining a professional veneer. "I was simply exploring alternatives that might better serve our clients," he said. "Ones that balance security with efficiency." I couldn't help but counter his claims. Efficiency should never come at the cost of security. This plan replicates the very vulnerabilities we're trying to fix. It prioritizes speed over protection. I turned to address the client relations team directly, ensuring everyone in the room knew where we stood. "The board has approved a comprehensive security overhaul because it doesn't cut corners. If we compromise now, we risk exposing not only our clients but also our reputation." Nathan opened his mouth to object, but I continued smoothly. "Of course, I welcome input on implementation methods. If anyone has suggestions to optimize processes without compromising security standards, please submit them through the proper channels. My door is always open for constructive collaboration." With that, I excused myself from the meeting, leaving Nathan to deal with the deflation of his attempted end run. As I walked back to my office, I knew this wouldn't be the last time Nathan would try to undermine the changes. But with each failed attempt, he would only reinforce the necessity of the security overhaul he resisted so much. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, audits, and presentations. The company was beginning to feel the weight of the changes, and slowly, employees were starting to support the new security initiatives. However, Nathan's stubbornness was only growing. It was as though he was grasping at straws to maintain control. But there was no turning back now. At the same time, I began to see cracks in Nathan's facade. Despite his continued opposition, the cracks in his leadership were becoming more apparent. People started coming to me with their concerns, revealing how Nathan had fostered a toxic, fear-driven environment. Several employees who had once been intimidated now approached me with information about security lapses, fearful of retaliation under Nathan's leadership but hopeful for a fresh start. I took the opportunity to dig deeper. I began reviewing the documentation left behind by Nathan's team, tracing the patterns of neglect and the shortcuts he had taken to pad profits. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that Nathan's negligence wasn't just a product of carelessness, it was deliberate. The true scope of the problem came into focus when I received a report from Tyler, a junior security analyst. He had been quietly tracking vulnerabilities that had slipped under the radar, and his findings were shocking. "There are 17 undocumented backdoor access points in our client systems," he told me. "These were created during the implementation phases Nathan managed." I felt my heart skip a beat. These weren't minor oversights, they were massive security failures. "Have you traced the source?" I asked. Tyler nodded grimly. Some of the access points came from masked VPNs, but the most concerning thing? 4 of them trace back to Director Parker's home network. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Nathan hadn't just been cutting corners. He had been accessing client systems from home, outside of business hours, without proper authorization. This wasn't a mistake, it was a violation of trust, and possibly even a legal breach. I immediately locked down the data and instructed Tyler to secure all logs. This had to be handled carefully, but I knew this was the final nail in the coffin. It was no longer just about professional misconduct. This was potential corporate espionage. And it was time for Nathan to be held accountable. Later that morning, I updated Richard about the breach. We scheduled a formal review to address the growing concerns about Nathan's activities. When the review finally took place, the evidence was overwhelming. Nathan's attempts to downplay the severity of the breaches were futile. His denial, though rehearsed, crumbled under the weight of the evidence. The committee reviewed the access logs, the unauthorized client data transfers, and the external IP addresses traced back to Nathan's home. The room fell silent as the facts were laid bare. Nathan's defenses were weak at best. his face pale with realization as the extent of his misconduct became apparent. Richard took the lead in calling for action. In light of these findings, Director Parker will be placed on administrative leave pending further investigation, he said firmly. Effective immediately, all access to Horizon systems will be suspended. Nathan's calm demeanor evaporated, replaced by a cold fury. You're making a huge mistake, he spat. I've worked for this company longer than anyone. I built this division from nothing. But none of that mattered anymore. The walls he had built were crumbling, and the foundation of Horizon was being rebuilt from the ground up. This wasn't just about his betrayal. It was about protecting the company and ensuring that no one else would ever abuse their power the way Nathan had. As I left the meeting, I could feel the weight of the changes ahead. Horizon was on the verge of a complete transformation, one that would not only fix the technical breaches but also rebuild the company's culture from the inside out. Nathan's story wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The weeks that followed Nathan's suspension were a blur of meetings, audits, and relentless work. Horizon was in the midst of an overhaul that would completely transform its security systems. As I stood in my office, reviewing the security protocols that were being implemented across the company, I knew that every decision, every step forward, was critical. We weren't just fixing a few problems, we were rebuilding trust, and that couldn't be done overnight. Nathan had underestimated the impact of his actions. It wasn't just about the financial fraud, the personal betrayal, or even the professional misconduct. It was about how deeply his lack of ethics had permeated the company, and how many people had been affected by it. Employees, clients, and shareholders alike. What Nathan had failed to grasp was that in the world of technology and security, integrity mattered more than speed or convenience. And I was here to prove it. Every day brought new challenges, and not all of them came from Nathan or his supporters. Some were rooted in the resistance that had been ingrained within Horizon's culture for years. For so long, employees had been conditioned to overlook vulnerabilities, to cut corners in the name of efficiency, and to avoid rocking the boat. Now that I was at the helm, the old way of doing things was crumbling. And as I pushed for transparency and rigorous security protocols, I began to notice something that no one could ignore. Change was happening. Employees who had once been afraid of speaking out were now coming forward with their concerns. They were eager to be part of something different, something better. One of the more significant changes came when Olivia approached me. She had been working closely with the compliance team since Nathan's departure, and I was beginning to notice her shift from the frightened, apologetic figure she had been at the beginning to someone more confident, someone willing to take responsibility for her actions. It was a slow transformation, but it was real. "Emily," she said one afternoon, as she entered my office without the usual hesitation, "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened." She hesitated, looking at me as if gauging my reaction. I just wanted to apologize for everything. For not seeing what was right in front of me. For being complicit in Nathan's decisions. I studied her for a moment, trying to read her. The guilt she carried was apparent, but I also saw something else. An earnestness, a desire to do the right thing. "Olivia," I said carefully, "I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in making sure this never happens again. If you're truly committed to that, then your cooperation is valuable. You can help us build a security culture that protects everyone, clients and employees alike." She nodded, her expression steady for the first time in weeks. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes." Her commitment meant something. It was a step forward, not just for her, but for the entire company. There was something profound about the way the situation was unfolding. How, in the wake of Nathan's betrayal, people were choosing accountability and transparency over fear and complicity. However, not everyone was on board with the changes. Some, particularly Nathan's closest allies in the client relations department, were actively resisting the security overhaul. They saw it as a threat to their established way of doing business, where speed and convenience had always trumped thoroughness. They weren't the only ones who had been conditioned to prioritize profits over safety. Nathan's leadership style had cultivated a corporate culture where security was seen as an obstacle, not a priority. That's when I started receiving reports about the resistance. More than one department head had voiced concerns about how the new security measures were slowing down their timelines, and there was talk of losing clients because of the delays. It was a familiar argument, the same one Nathan had used to justify his shortcuts. It's too slow, they said. We're losing our competitive edge. I knew the argument well. It was the same excuse Nathan had used when he'd ignored security vulnerabilities in favor of getting deals done quickly. I had to face it head-on. I knew that a strong security culture wasn't built on shortcuts or compromise, but on a commitment to long-term protection. And if there was one thing I had learned over the last 6 months, it was that there was no going back to the old way of doing things. One afternoon, as I was preparing for a meeting with the board, I received an urgent update from Grace. "Emily, Nathan's been trying to get back into the building," she said, her voice tight. "He's been calling clients directly, suggesting that the security overhaul is unnecessary. He's telling them it's just a way to delay their projects." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Where is he now?" "In the lobby, trying to meet with some of the executives," she replied. I was done with the games. It was time for Nathan to face the consequences of his actions. I walked to the lobby, where I found him, his posture as arrogant as ever. He looked up at me, trying to mask his frustration behind a forced smile. "Impressive performance today, Emily," he said, leaning casually against the wall. "But the board will eventually realize that real client relationships can't be managed by someone who's so risk-averse." I met his gaze evenly, my voice steady. "Security isn't about cutting corners, Nathan. It's about building foundations that can withstand pressure. Something you never understood." His smile faltered, replaced by a sneer. "You think you've won, don't you? But this is just the beginning." "On that, we agree completely," I replied, walking away from him, leaving him with the knowledge that he had no more power here. He had underestimated me for too long, and now the company was mine to lead into a new era. By the time the next board meeting came around, the pressure was mounting on Nathan. His attempts to undermine the overhaul were no longer subtle. They were direct confrontations with the company's leadership. The board, however, was firmly behind me. Nathan's position was increasingly untenable. The more he resisted, the more his actions were exposed, both in his professional role and in the personal betrayals he had inflicted upon me. I stood before the board, presenting my findings and the progress we had made in the security overhaul. The metrics were undeniable. Horizon's systems were stronger than they had ever been. The client trust, which Nathan had eroded through his shortcuts, was beginning to be rebuilt. But more importantly, the employees who had once been afraid were now speaking up, voicing their concerns and working together to implement the changes that had been so long overdue. As I finished my presentation, Richard Harmon, the board chairman, looked at me with an approving smile. "Excellent work, Emily," he said. "The board fully supports the changes you're implementing. We're moving forward with your strategy." And just like that, I knew it was real. The transformation wasn't just happening in the systems we had built, it was happening in the very fabric of Horizon. What had started as a response to personal betrayal had now become a company-wide revolution in security culture. The weeks passed quickly as the security infrastructure was overhauled, but the work didn't stop. We continued to address the vulnerabilities that had been ignored for so long, and with every step forward, Nathan's influence waned. The truth about his actions, his theft, his manipulation, his professional and personal betrayals, came to light, and with it, the realization that the company was better off without him. By the time Horizon reached the final stages of its transformation, Nathan had been officially terminated. The legal proceedings were already underway. The data theft and corporate espionage allegations were being taken seriously. As for me, I was no longer the woman who had been betrayed. I was the leader who had rebuilt a company from the ashes of deceit and mismanagement. As I sat in my office, watching the final pieces of the transformation fall into place, I couldn't help but think back to that night 6 months ago. The night my world had been turned upside down. It had seemed like an ending then. But now, as I looked out over the skyline of Seattle, I realized it had been the beginning of something much more powerful. I had learned that the deepest wounds often lead to the most profound growth. And I was just getting started. 3 months into Horizon's transformation, it felt like I had been living in a completely different world from the one I had entered just 6 months ago. The new security culture was taking root across the company, and its effects were being felt not only in the systems but in the attitude of every employee. What had started as a response to personal betrayal had now grown into something much larger, an industry-recognized movement toward ethical security practices. The metrics spoke volumes. 82% of critical vulnerabilities had been addressed, client retention was up by 94%, and internal satisfaction scores were at their highest levels ever. Employees were no longer walking on eggshells, fearful of speaking up or questioning authority. There was a tangible sense of empowerment, and I could feel it in every meeting, in every conversation. But even with all these wins, the journey was far from over. The process of rebuilding a culture and shifting a company's ethos took time. The deeper shifts, the ones that would prevent future breaches of trust and security, were still underway. Yet, I couldn't deny the pride that bubbled up within me when I saw the change, the shift in the air. Horizon was no longer the company Nathan had built with shortcuts and manipulations. It was mine, built on integrity, transparency, and an unwavering commitment to client protection. It was during a late evening at the office, the building bathed in soft orange light from the setting sun, that I received a call from Dr. Diane Foster. She had become one of my closest mentors, guiding me through the early stages of the security transformation. Her insight into security ethics had shaped much of the framework we were implementing at Horizon. "Emily," she said, her voice warm but firm, "I wanted to let you know that Horizon is being asked to present its security transformation at the Northwest Tech Innovation Conference. They've asked for you specifically. The impact you've had in such a short period of time hasn't gone unnoticed." I paused, taking in the news. It felt surreal, but at the same time, it was the culmination of everything I had worked for. "Are you sure about this? I mean, it's a huge step." "You've earned it," she said, her tone filled with certainty. "You've turned Horizon around, and now it's time to share that with the world. Your approach, focusing on people, trust, and ethics, is something the entire tech industry needs to see. It will be a blueprint for change." It was a chance to not only showcase Horizon's transformation but to spread a message: security and integrity are not optional. They are the foundation upon which any lasting company should be built. "Okay," I said, the words feeling right as they left my mouth. "Let's do it." The preparations for the conference were a whirlwind. As I worked with the team on refining the case study, ensuring all aspects of the transformation were represented, I found myself reflecting on the personal journey that had led me to this moment. What had started as a painful discovery, uncovering Nathan's lies and betrayal, had evolved into something much bigger. It was no longer about proving myself to him, or anyone else. It was about something more profound. Using that experience of betrayal to build something that would protect others, that would be a model for how to build trust and security in an industry often focused more on speed and profit than the ethical implications of its decisions. As the conference day approached, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. This wasn't just a chance to speak about Horizon's success. It was an opportunity to speak on behalf of every tech professional who had been frustrated with the status quo, who had felt the pressure to compromise on security, to take shortcuts for the sake of a faster sale. I had seen firsthand what those decisions cost, not just in terms of data or systems but in the very trust that companies rely on to thrive. The day of the conference arrived, and I stood backstage, feeling the weight of the moment. The auditorium was packed, and the energy in the room was palpable. Tech leaders, investors, and security experts from across the region had gathered to hear about Horizon's transformation. As the moderator introduced me, I walked out onto the stage, the bright lights blinding me for a moment as the audience erupted into applause. It took me a moment to compose myself. I had prepared for this, but there was something about standing there, knowing that the future of corporate security culture was being shaped in real time, that made it feel even more significant. I took a deep breath and began. "Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emily Parker, and I'm the Chief Security Officer at Horizon Digital Solutions. Thank you for having me here today." I paused, letting the crowd settle in. I'm here today to talk about transformation, specifically, the transformation of a company, its security systems, and its culture. But this story isn't just about technology. It's about people, trust, and the values that drive decisions throughout an organization. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, which displayed a comprehensive map of Horizon's security vulnerabilities before the overhaul. For years, I continued, Horizon operated under the assumption that speed was the ultimate priority. Security was seen as an obstacle, something that slowed down deployments and delayed profits. But the reality we discovered was much different. Compromising security for the sake of efficiency leaves organizations vulnerable, not just to breaches, but to reputational damage, legal liability, and most importantly, the loss of trust. I could see the audience nodding along, many of them silently processing the truth behind my words. I knew this resonated with them, because it resonated with me. It wasn't just Horizon's transformation. It was a model for every company in the tech industry that was still operating with the belief that shortcuts were acceptable. As you can see, I continued, clicking to the next slide, which displayed Horizon's new security framework. We made the decision to implement a comprehensive overhaul of our security systems. But the real change? It wasn't just in the systems we built. It was in the culture we rebuilt. I shared the numbers, client retention rates, breach reduction statistics, and the most telling of all, employee satisfaction scores that had skyrocketed since the changes began. But it wasn't just about the numbers. The real story was about the people, the employees who had once been afraid to speak up, who were now taking ownership of the security initiatives. They had gone from feeling powerless to empowered. The presentation concluded with a standing ovation. The applause echoed in my ears as I stood at the podium, absorbing the moment. This wasn't about me. It was about the collective effort that had transformed Horizon into something unrecognizable, a company built on security, ethics, and transparency. As the applause subsided, the moderator opened the floor for questions. The first came from a senior executive at a prominent tech firm. You've obviously implemented significant changes. But how do you maintain this new culture long term? How do you ensure that it doesn't revert to the way it was before? I smiled, knowing this was where the real work lay. It starts at the top, with leadership that values transparency and ethical behavior. But it's also about creating an environment where employees feel safe raising concerns, where security isn't just something the IT department worries about, it's something everyone is responsible for. The questions kept coming, each one more thoughtful than the last. As the Q&A session came to a close, I felt a sense of accomplishment. This wasn't just a moment for Horizon. It was a moment for the industry. The conversation about security had shifted. It was no longer just about technology. It was about responsibility, integrity, and creating a culture where security was a priority, not a side note. Later that evening, as I mingled with attendees, I caught sight of Richard Harmon, the chairman of the board. He had been instrumental in supporting the transformation from the very beginning. His presence had been steady through the chaos, and his commitment to ensuring the changes went beyond the surface was unwavering. You did it, he said with a smile as he approached. This conference is just the beginning. Horizon's influence is spreading across the industry. I nodded, feeling a sense of pride swell within me. It's not about Horizon anymore. It's about changing the way the entire industry thinks about security. Richard clapped me on the back. Exactly. And I think we're already seeing that happen. The conference was a turning point, not just for Horizon but for me. The journey that had begun with personal betrayal had led to something far more significant. A movement that would change the way the tech industry viewed security, transparency, and integrity. What had started as a painful chapter in my life had evolved into something much bigger, a revolution in how businesses protect their clients and their people. As I returned to Horizon, ready to continue the work of building something stronger and more secure, I knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning. 3 months after Horizon's transformation, everything had changed. The building, once filled with tension and anxiety, was now brimming with purpose and optimism. The old ways, The shortcuts, the rushed timelines, the fear of speaking out, were becoming a distant memory. What had once been an insecure company, operating under a veil of secrecy, was now a beacon of transparency, a model for how to build a security culture that placed integrity at its core. The changes, however, weren't just in the systems we implemented or the policies we enforced. The most significant shift had been the company's heart, its people. Employees no longer felt compelled to hide their concerns or remain silent in the face of shortcuts and negligence. They had a voice, and that voice was now being heard. The transformation had gone beyond fixing vulnerabilities. It had reshaped the very fabric of Horizon's identity. As I walked through the office, I couldn't help but notice the difference. The once morose hallways, where whispers about the status quo were the norm, now buzzed with conversations about progress, improvement, and collaboration. The Security Enhancement Center, where our teams were constantly working to patch vulnerabilities and refine systems, had become a hub of innovation and collective effort. Tyler, my junior security analyst who had once been hesitant and unsure of himself, now stood confidently at the center of the room, explaining complex remediation processes to a group of eager employees from various departments. It was a sight I could never have imagined just a few months ago. But despite the victories, there was still the aftermath of Nathan's betrayal to contend with. The legal proceedings against him had moved quickly, and Horizon's legal team had prepared to pursue restitution for the affected clients. Nathan's termination had been swift and decisive, though not without its own set of challenges. His attorney had offered a settlement, but the board had refused to let the matter be swept under the rug with a non-disclosure agreement. Horizon was committed to transparency, not just with clients but with the world. We were going to ensure that the consequences of Nathan's actions were clear, and that the security systems we had worked so hard to build would remain beyond reproach. Nathan's resignation had sent ripples through the tech community. His reputation, once built on cutting corners and disregarding security in favor of profitability, had crumbled under the weight of his actions. The very culture he had fostered, a culture of fear, intimidation, and shortcuts, was being replaced by a culture rooted in responsibility and integrity. It wasn't just about Horizon anymore. This was about an entire industry shifting its approach to security. The tech world was finally beginning to recognize that transparency, ethics, and real protection were the pillars of sustainable success. The next big milestone was Horizon's first ever public appearance as an ethical security leader at the Northwest Tech Innovation Conference. I had delivered the keynote, focusing on how the company had transformed from a place of neglectful security practices to one that prided itself on protecting client data and building lasting trust. The speech had been met with enthusiastic applause, but it wasn't just about the applause. It was about the conversations that followed, the ripple effect that Horizon's story had on other companies and professionals in the room. There was a palpable sense of validation in the air as the conference ended. Horizon's story had become a beacon for companies looking to shift their security mindset. And it wasn't just the success metrics that resonated with others. It was the message that ethical decisions and transparency mattered, that good security was built on trust, not fear, and that there was a better way forward. A way that didn't compromise client protection for the sake of convenience. But as the week drew to a close, something unexpected happened. I received a call from Olivia. Since the Security Ethics Committee had met to review her role in the past security breaches, she had been reassigned to compliance. Her transformation was a reflection of the broader changes at Horizon. The once ambiguous space she had occupied, caught between loyalty to Nathan and the ethical dilemma of working under him, had shifted. She had chosen to take responsibility, work transparently, and embrace the new culture of integrity that had taken root at Horizon. "I just wanted to say," Olivia said, her voice softer than I remembered, "I've learned so much in the last few months. Not just about security, but about accountability. I wish I had understood it sooner. You've changed the entire culture here. I didn't think it was possible." Her words were a bittersweet reminder of the complexity of the situation. I couldn't deny the tension between us, the trust that had been broken, the betrayal we had both suffered. But there was no denying that she had played a pivotal role in helping Horizon turn a corner. She wasn't the same person I had known months ago. And neither was I. "I'm glad you're finding your place," I replied, my tone steady but reflective. The work we're doing here is bigger than any one of us. We're building something better. And that, I realized, was the true legacy of Horizon's transformation. It wasn't just about fixing broken systems or implementing new protocols. It was about creating a culture that valued integrity over shortcuts, transparency over secrecy, and real security over artificial success. As the days turned into weeks, Horizon's security overhaul continued to gain momentum. Our systems were stronger, our clients were safer, and our internal culture was unrecognizable from the one that had once been plagued by fear and compromise. Nathan's shadow had long since faded, replaced by a team of professionals who were driven by purpose, not fear. And as I stood in my office, reflecting on the work we had done, I couldn't help but feel a sense of profound satisfaction. This journey, one that began with the painful discovery of betrayal, had led to something far greater than personal revenge. It had led to a professional renaissance, a reimagining of what a company could be when its culture was grounded in values that protected both its people and its clients. The transformation at Horizon wasn't just about security systems. It was about rebuilding trust, integrity, and responsibility, creating a model for the industry that would stand the test of time. The day the settlement with Nathan was finalized, I stood by the window of my office, watching the Seattle skyline shimmer in the distance. The last remnants of the storm were clearing, leaving the city bathed in a golden light. The transformation was now complete, and as I looked out over the city, I realized that the journey had not only changed Horizon but had changed me as well. I wasn't the same woman who had discovered the betrayal 6 months ago. Back then, I had been consumed with anger, confusion, and hurt. But now, I was standing tall, leading a revolution in corporate security culture. The painful experiences I had endured had revealed strengths I had never known existed within me. It was those very strengths, resilience, courage, integrity, that had allowed me to turn a betrayal into a blueprint for success. In the end, Horizon's transformation was more than just a corporate success story. It was a testament to the power of vulnerability, of confronting painful truths and using them to build something that would last. Nathan's shortcuts had cost him everything, but in his wake, I had found the opportunity to build a legacy of integrity that would protect countless clients for years to come. As I left my office that evening, the last of the workers filtering out into the night, I knew one thing for certain. The journey had been difficult, but it had been worth every step. Horizon was no longer just a company. It was a symbol of the power of ethical leadership, transparency, and the unwavering belief that security was built on trust, not shortcuts. And as I walked into the evening, Seattle's skyline twinkling around me, I couldn't help but smile. The real work had only just begun.